Some tips for inoculating our grain bags. These also apply for our all-in-one bags. If you take a look, we used to use these round injection ports. We still have some inventory of those, so every now and then we'll still have bags with the round ports going out. But we did recently upgrade to the square ports that are adhered by the manufacturer directly to the bag. They come behind this nice little layer of plastic. So either works fine. They both accomplish the same thing. Whenever you are inoculating your bags, the main thing is you want to work somewhat quickly. What I recommend people do is use an alcohol wipe, a prep pad, a bleach Clorox wipe, basically anything with alcohol or bleach on it. Rub the injection port, and then you can leave that pad or cloth on the injection port so that it stays wet with the chemical that you rub on it. Then what you do is you get your syringe ready. You want to do this in an area with no air movement, so turn off your fans, turn off the air conditioning, be somewhere where it's still, no one's walking around, there's no animals around you. Take your cap off of your syringe, and then you take the needle out of the packaging and apply that to your syringe. Now this needle, it's sterile. Inside of this, it's completely sterile. There's nothing alive in there. So you can have it hang out like this. There's no issues with this. Once you take this cap off, it's exposed to the air and contaminants can get onto it. As long as that cap is on, you're good. So what I recommend people do, finish rubbing the injection port with a little bit of material still on the injection port, uncap, and then immediately push your syringe into the bag. And then we recommend between 2 and 4 cc's of material. Syringes have these lines that shows you how much is in there, and you just measure from the plunger. So 2 cc's, it's about 2 milliliters, and that'll work for 3-pound bags or 5-pound bags. It doesn't matter what size grain bag you're using. Same with our all-in-one bags, 2 to 4 cc per bag. And what you want to do is while you're injecting it, kind of wiggle your needle around, and that'll get your material to be spread out a little bit inside of the bag. It won't just be in one tight clump in the center. So we're going to put in a little extra on this one. You can't use too much if you're only using 10 milliliter syringe. You can't use too much. If you're using a big 60 mil syringe, you might get a little bit too much. It might get pooled up at the bottom. If you're doing multiple bags, the main thing that people mess up with this is they'll take this syringe and they'll use that again. And where they mess up is if you just take an alcohol prep pad and you wipe your syringe needle off and do another bag, it's no longer sterile. Mold spores that are in the air aren't killed or deactivated by alcohol. They also need a decent amount of time of exposure to ammonia or to bleach to be deactivated. And so if you're taking a paper towel or a prep pad that's been exposed to the air and you're rubbing it on your needle, what you might have is some mold spores have landed on your paper towel or your prep pad, and then whenever you wipe your needle, you get those spores onto your needle, and then when you put it in the bag, those spores get into the bag, and then you contaminate your project. So what you want to do is just use a lighter or a blowtorch and get your needle red hot. Heat it up until it's red hot, and that kills off anything that's landed on it, and then let it cool off, and then you'll inoculate your next bag. Don't heat it up and then wipe it again, because you're going to do the same thing. You're going to get some mold spores onto the needle. You're going to contaminate your bag. That's bad. Once your bag is inoculated, we recommend folding your bag so that the air filter covers up the injection port. You don't have to put a piece of tape or anything on either style injection port. The point of the injection port is that it's rubber and it'll seal itself kind of like a tire. If you put a needle or a nail in a tire and you pull it out, it'll close itself and it'll hold that pressure still within reason. these aren't really getting weight pushed on them, so that hole, it's sealed up. You don't have to worry about air getting in or out of that. So we recommend folding your bag. You can push the air out through the air filter so that your bag stays nice and tight for the next part of the colonization process. And just fold your bag over so that the air filter is towards the inside on the same side as the injection port. And so that way you're not having a lot of air going into or out of the bag, and your mycelium will be able to breathe the air that's in the bag, but it won't dry out your bag. These grain bags, if it's fast, they can grow within about 2 weeks, but they can take up to 6 weeks just for the grain to colonize. Same thing with our all-in-ones. Typically they'll grow within like 2 to 4 weeks, but sometimes it can take longer. If you have a long project and you've had your bag sitting up the whole time, you're going to lose a lot of moisture through the air filter, and then whenever your mycelium gets to those dry parts, it's not going to want to colonize those parts. So we recommend folding it over and then storing it so that the air doesn't come into or out of your filter, and your mycelium will just grow just fine like that. When your all-in-one or grain bags are colonizing, you want to have it completely dark. You can look at them occasionally, let some light in. It's not a huge deal breaker there, but you mostly want them kept in the dark. During colonization, you want your bags to be between 72 and 75 degrees. If you have your bag somewhere cold where it's below 70, it's going to take a long time for the mycelium to grow. It's not going to be able to grow quickly. You want to have it above 70 degrees and typically below 80 degrees to help with the mycelium grow quickly. If you have it over 75 degrees, that's all right. Ideally, you want it between 72 and 75. Going over 80, it's getting kind of too hot. It puts stress on the mycelium, and it can slow the growth down as well. Whenever you get to the point where you're ready to fruit your bag, you want your bag to be somewhere where there's a 12 on, 12 off light cycle nearby. So you can have a light on a timer nearby and just 12 on, 12 off, and then you want the temperature to be slightly lower than your colonizing temperature. Ideally, you want it between 68 to 70 degrees for a lot of varieties that our customers grow. For gourmets, it's really variety dependent. Some varieties like mid 60s, some like lower 60s, some like up into the 70s. But typically, between 68 and 70 degrees, you'll get fruits to grow, especially with the light on nearby doing a 12-12 cycle. Also, something to keep in mind when fruiting your bags and colonizing your bags, the walls of your house, if it's cold outside and you have a shelf on the side of your house and you put your bag there, if it's colder outside, your bag's going to be colder. Between 6 and 12 inches from the wall, it's either going to be colder if it's colder outside or warmer if it's warmer outside. Your thermostat is usually going to be in the center of your room, so it keeps that temperature in the center a certain degree. But if it's on the side, if you have a shelf on the side of your wall, it's going to be a few degrees whichever way it is outside. So if it's 70 degrees in the center of your room and you think that it's fine, but it's 30 degrees outside, that shelf might be down in the 50s, it might be in the 60s, and so you might see slower growth. Same within the summer, if it's 100 degrees outside, it says that the center of your room is 70 degrees, but you got your bag over there, it might be 80 degrees and your bag might struggle in that. You want to keep your projects somewhere where there's not a ton of air movement. You don't want a lot of air being forced at your bag because that'll take away some of the moisture from the air filter. If you've got a really dry environment in your house, the air is going to pull the moisture from your bag through that air filter, so try to keep it somewhere where there's not a lot of air movement. For our all-in-one bags, once you get to about 50% colonized, that's when you want to mix your bag up. So if we look at this bag, we've got a nice colonization going on here. Not so much on that side, not so much on this side. Plenty on that side, plenty on the bottom, plenty on that side. So you're going to mix it up. Once you mix up your bag, you're going to let it colonize again, following the same colonization temperatures and lighting between 72 and 75 degrees and in the dark. And you can keep your bag folded again over this way so that the moisture and whatnot doesn't leave through the air filter. Something to keep in mind, once your entire block is colonized, it's fully white, you're ready to start fruiting, we recommend that you just lift up your bag and air will get inside of it. That gives your mushrooms space on top to grow into the empty portion of the bag. If you keep your bag folded over like this, mushrooms aren't going to be able to grow here because there's no space, and CO2 is going to get trapped right here. So we recommend that you lift up your bag. If you lift up your bag and it just falls back over, what you can do is grab opposite sides of the fold on your bag and you can kind of peel them apart. And what that does is it pulls air through the filter into the bag. So we pull apart like this and just gently repeat that process a few times. And eventually you'll start to get more and more air inside of the bag, and then that'll make it so that your bag can stand up nice and straight really easily. That gives your mushrooms space to grow in, and it also lets the CO2 have an easier path out through the air filter. Air will come in through the filter. It's something that'll naturally happen. You don't have to do anything special. We don't recommend modifying your bag until you've tried fruiting for at least 2 weeks with the bag how it comes. So that means it's 100% colonized. You've got a light on nearby on a 12 on, 12 off timer. You've got the bag at say 68 degrees. You've got the top propped open. 2 weeks passes, you don't see any pins forming anywhere on the bag. What you can do next is cut a small slit up here in the top right underneath the impulse seal. Just cut one on this side and one on the other side. And then what you can do is push on the bag and the air that's inside will be forced out. And then you can lift the bag up again, do the little pull thing. It'll pull air into the bag. You'll have fresh air in there. You can do it again. And then again, lift it up, get some more air in there. And then fold your bag a little bit and put either like a chip clip or some paper clips on the top to keep the bag shut like this, and that'll keep the moisture inside of your bag. If you do that every day for 2 weeks and you still don't see any fruits forming, then the next step would be to remove the entire bag and take your colonized block and put that inside of a tote bin that has moist perlite in the bottom. You'll be fruiting the bag as a cake, is what they call it. You have the block inside of the bin on the moist perlite that keeps the humidity high, and that gives plenty of air for your mushrooms to fruit in. Some varieties like a lot of fresh air, and so they won't fruit inside of a bag. Typically, that doesn't really come up. Being able to fruit in the bag is something that most mushrooms are able to do. Fruiting as a cake, you don't get any more mushrooms, you don't get any more yield from it. It's just a different way to fruit if something's not working. Your yield is dependent on the materials that you put into the project. So one 3-pound block isn't going to fruit more material than another 3-pound block just because it has more surface area exposed. The surface area has little to nothing to do with yield. The yield is always going to be the amount of material put in and the genetics that you use to grow. For colonization, using a wood-based substrate, you'll typically have colonization. It'll take roughly 2 to 4 weeks for most varieties. Some genetics are a little bit slower, some are faster. It's the same with all mushrooms. Whenever you're growing with a core vermiculite gypsum substrate like what we sell, you'll typically see colonization of the substrate finish up usually in about 2 to 4 weeks, especially with our all-in-ones. With our all-in-ones, once you've got half of the grain colonized and you mix it up, it'll pretty much go right through the substrate and remaining material because it has a lot of nutrition from the grain that it's colonized. The grain colonizing period, again, can vary, but usually once the mycelium has the nutrients from the grain, the substrate colonization period is pretty typical, usually 2-3 weeks max, because it's got all that energy from the grains. We sell core vermiculite gypsum substrate that we add azomite to. That's for manure-loving mushrooms or dung-loving mushrooms. We use azomite to mimic the nutrition and mineral content of manure. That way you get all of the minerals and nutrition without having to have animal manure in your grow area or in your house. It gives you everything that you need to grow without having to deal with, animal feces, basically. We also sell plain hardwood sawdust. Plain hardwood sawdust, it's used for some gourmets. If you have a gourmet variety that you don't necessarily need large fruits from, so that can be reishi. You can use just plain hardwood sawdust. A lot of the time, whenever people are growing just for CO2, so if you're growing those blocks to have in your grow area for your plants, you can use plain hardwood sawdust and you won't get massive fruits that you have to deal with, but the mycelium will still be in there, it'll still be respirating, so you'll get plenty of CO2 from those. The last option that we have for substrate is Master's Mix. It's a 50-50 blend of soy hulls and hardwood sawdust. That's for whenever you're growing gourmet mushrooms and you want a nice yield from them. Typically from a 5-pound bag of Master's Mix, with oysters we'll get around 2 pounds per 5-pound bag of substrate. Lion's mane will get about 1.5 to 2 pounds per block. So it's got really good yield performance just because it's got a lot of nutrition in it. It's got plenty of moisture in it, and mycelium loves it. It chews right through it, grows very quickly usually, and it works for any wood-loving variety. So a lot of the time, people will see just mycelium growing in like one spot on a bag, and they'll think that it's not growing anywhere else. It's just in that one spot. A lot of people forget that whenever you inoculate your bag, you insert a needle fully into the bag. So you're going into your bag, say 2 inches, 3 inches or so, and you inoculate into there. So you've got all of your spores or your liquid culture mycelium centered inside the center of the bag. Once you start seeing a little bit of growth somewhere in the bag, you can assume that deeper in the bag or along that part of the bag, you've got more growth. So if it's been a week and you only have a small little dime size shape of mycelium around your injection port, you probably have deeper in the bag maybe a golf ball size of mycelium that's growing in there. And mycelium grows out radially. So it might look like just a flat disc on the outside of the bag to you, but deeper inside the bag, it's been growing out radially. So you're only, if you've got a ball and you just see one part of the ball, it's also been growing in all the other directions at the same time. If you're growing in one of our all-in-one bags and you see just a little bit of mycelium and it's been a while, it's been say 3 weeks, what you can do is kind of gently massage some of the grain so that it starts to go over the top of that mycelium, and that can give that mycelium a little bit more access to more nutrition, more grain, because like I said, the mycelium is growing radially, and so it'll grow into that grain that you put over the front while still continuing to grow outwards from the other parts of the growth. Something that you don't want to do is you don't want to mix up your bag before enough mycelium is present. If it's really early on and you're rushing things, say you only have 10% of your bag colonized, and then you take that mycelium and you crush it up, you mix it in your bag, that mycelium doesn't have a lot of access to nutrition. It's really young, and so it's easy to damage that mycelium, and so you risk damaging the mycelium enough where it's not going to be able to regrow. It's going to think that there's a predator or something happened, it got stepped on or something, and it's not going to want to grow anymore. It's going to go into a kind of hibernation state. It's going to stall out and not grow, and then with you trying to rush your project, now it's a total failure. So we recommend patience is absolutely key. Let things take their time. Some people develop at different speeds. It's the same thing with mushroom mycelium. It grows at different speeds. You can even have 2 bags that were inoculated on the same day with the same syringe, and they'll grow at different rates. It's the same as having 2 twins that are different heights. It's just something that nature does. Any questions you guys can think of?
Where'd Where's my serum?
Brad, you got any questions? We don't include serum.